Hi, welcome to today's Voice of Greatness broadcast. My name is Joel Bryant and I'm your host. And on today's broadcast, I want to speak to you about something that I call the digression of greatness. I talk a lot about greatness, and sometimes when you hear that term, it may convey something that's abstract and not concrete, and it lacks the ability to be measured or the ability to be documented and metrics created that allow us to gauge and to graph our relationship to greatness. So when I speak about greatness, I'm talking about something very specific, something that's measurable, that can be managed and monitored and maintained and maintenance, and to help us to understand where we stand in our relationship to our pursuit of greatness. So never think when we're talking about greatness, we're talking about some effect. Now, when we hear the term success, we usually think about some measure or some type of identifying markers and landmarks and road marks that can allow us to identify where we are. Some type of sign or symbol or substance that allows us to assess our progress. And so when I talk about greatness, I am talking about something that's very tangible, very practical, even though it's atypical in terms of its effect once it's manifested in our lives. And so when you talk about greatness, you can't determine if you've digressed if there's no measurement, if there's no benchmark, if there's no way that you can identify where you stand this week versus next week or even next year. Now, how you interpret those markers and those benchmarks and how you allow them to guide your practice or to discourage your practice, that's another question and another equation. But the only way you can determine if you've digressed is if you have a benchmark. And one of the best benchmarks of greatness is this: you have to understand and establish a pattern and a process that you believe that if worked and sustained over time will eventually enable you to get to your mark and your goal of greatness. And now, so let's just say, for instance, let's use something very simple that most Americans can relate to and most people can relate to. And this is only just to get us an idea of how we can look at our quest for greatness and determine whether or not we've digressed. Let's say losing weight or gaining weight. So let's say you weigh 160 pounds and you want to gain 10 pounds. And so let's say you establish a routine for how many calories you need to intake that day, maybe what type of exercise, and you go to somebody, a personal trainer, and they give you a blueprint. They give you a pattern or some type of schematic to help you sketch your progress to gain 10 pounds. And so every day you have these 5 sets of routines that you do every single day. Diet, exercise, and whatever those elements are in your equation. But they consist of 5 components. And let's say each of these components, you do those components approximately 30 minutes a day. Now, if in the next 2 weeks, after the first 2 weeks, you stop doing those variables and stop committing yourself to those components to each time, then you have digressed. And let me just rephrase and revisit that. If you have 5 components given to you by a personal trainer, and these 5 components have 30-minute time commitments to be done over the course of, let's say, 6 weeks, and if after the second week, 10 days, you're no longer doing all 5 components, let's say you're doing 3, and you're doing all 3 of those that require 30-minute time commitments. Well, there are 2 that you're omitting. You may have a rationale that you've constructed or a reason that you embrace as the basis for your change, but based upon somebody who knows how to put on weight and beef up a body, you have digressed from greatness because you're no longer doing what an expert said based upon your particular frame and your metabolism, what it's going to take to achieve greatness. Now, you can argue, you can debate, you can do all those things, but unless your debate is sustained and substantiated by other trainers who are equally adept and informed and skillful and knowledgeable about your particular situation, then no matter what you say, no matter what I say, I have digressed in my pursuit of greatness. So one of the ways that's going to help you sustain your intentionality and be attentive and get beyond the myth, get beyond the fog, be able to turn your passion into excellence, all those things that I've talked about in other videos, you have got to establish standards, benchmarks that enable you to evaluate and to assess and to determine when and whether you have digressed from your greatness. And that's so important because a lot of times we can use the term greatness or even success to kind of hide behind really a lack of commitment. It's like if you go to Hollywood and everybody's waiting tables say, well, I'm an actor and I'm an actress. And that may or may not be true. But then my question would be, how many auditions are you getting a week? How many are you applying for? What did other people who succeeded in Hollywood, who are actresses waiting tables, how many times a week do they audition? What is the basis of your benchmark? See, that's huge also. It's not enough to have benchmarks, but is your benchmark, is it substantiated by somebody else's success? What is the premise of your pattern? What is the basis of your practice? A lot of us have benchmarks that are really unsubstantiated, and they're just kind of pulled out of the air, and that's okay. We don't have to copy somebody else's pattern, but we should be able to give a rational reason that would make a rational person say, well, I understand the premise of your practice. And I may disagree with it, but if you're consistent and persistent and intuitive and attentional and attentive, then based upon those qualities and factors, it is possible for you to turn your practice to be consistent and to be sure that you don't digress. But if you have no way of measuring your digression, measuring your practice, then you will digress from greatness and not even know it. I remember reading a story years ago, and it was about Michael Jordan. I think this when he was a junior at Carolina, I believe. And he was having a good season, but not a Jordan season. And so Dean Smith, the Carolina coach, called him in the locker room one day, and they began to watch a bunch of game films from the previous season, Jordan's sophomore season. And then they watched some of the games from his junior season, his first half of his junior season. And Dean Smith says, what's the difference? And Michael sits there and he quizzes Michael, and Michael's like, I'm really not sure. And Dean said this, and this is what I read, and so it's a paraphrase. He said, look at last year. Last year you were playing defense. You were playing at both ends of the court. And because you were playing defense, you got to steal, you caused a broken play. And when you did that, you made a spectacular dunk or a spectacular play. This year, you're not playing defense. You're playing for the spectacular play, and that's why you're not having a great season. See, a good coach, a good mentor, a good tutor can help you to identify the flaws in your practices, the deficiencies in your routine, in your discipline that is causing you not to get the results that you anticipated or that you were getting in a former time in your career or in your path. And it's very important because I say it this way. If I don't do the obvious, it's very unlikely that I will do the marvelous. And see, greatness is the marvelous. And the marvelous is actually what I call the dynamics of greatness. It's all the things that come from doing the routine. But the obvious are the mechanics of greatness. Those are the daily activities that we embrace, we pursue, we undergo, and we engage. And that we do that, and we have our own routine established based upon a proven pattern, then we can identify when we've digressed. Guys, that is so huge. So many people will tell you, and they will rehearse to you what they're doing. And you ask them, well, what is the basis of your practice? Where did you get that from? And they'll say, well, I just, and they won't be able to give you really a rational or a credible reason for that practice. And then not only that, because it's not really written down in stone or on the wall somewhere, or they don't have some type of accountability document, then they're not able to notice when they digress. Because they don't have a routine. They don't say, I'm going to get up every morning, I'm going to read 4 articles on social media, and I'm going to read 5 on personal branding, I'm going to log on 10 websites, and they don't have a pattern for their practice. And so when they get discouraged, when they get disenchanted, they gradually begin to turn away from those pursuits, those activities, those endeavors that are the very basis of greatness, and little by little they digress until they stop getting any kind of results. And then over time, they eventually quit what once compelled. I want to encourage you. What is the basis of your practice? If you don't know, it's okay. But ask yourself, ask other people. Read, find out, and if you're trying to create something new, then guess what? You will become the standard. But if you're not consistent and diligent, and if you don't document what you are doing and how often that you do it, then little by little, like that person who was trying to put on 10 pounds, you'll stop doing those routines that have been established for you by a personal trainer. And then you will defend your indifference. You will defend the alteration of your routine, and you will not embrace the fact that I'm not getting results because I begin to digress from the very basic. See, this is talking about basic things. But to achieve greatness, you have to have exceeding practice. I mean, you've got to do more than the basic. The basic is just the basis. The exceptional is what's required to achieve a standard that in its effect we call greatness. So don't be like Michael Jordan in his early career. Now, you notice one thing about Jordan in his pro career, he was always on the all-defensive team and even won Defensive Player of the Year 1 year. All because I guarantee you he thought about what Dean Smith said. He was playing for the spectacular play, not playing good defense, not understanding what the mechanics of defense was, and in so doing, he was not having the kind of season that eventually led him to become what I consider the greatest player who's ever touched a basketball. Now, you and I may not want to be like Michael Jordan, but we want to be the best in our field. We want to achieve greatness. We don't want to digress and not know it. So have benchmarks, have landmarks, have signs, symbols, have some kind of accountability document or discipline that enables you to identify when you've digressed from greatness. And if you do that, make the corrections, make the adjustments, modify your practice, change your attitude, fit your practice to your own particular unique circumstance. Because here's the thing that's so important. Guidelines are simply that. They're not gods. They're simply guides. Take whatever you learn and make it fit your situation. That's the key. Because a lot of times if we take something that's not tailor made for us, we're going to find it very difficult over the long haul to sustain the practice. That is the very premise of the possibility of greatness. So I want to encourage you today. Don't digress from greatness. And if you do digress, guess what? Don't start over, start now. Remember I said you have to change your language to change your life. If you stop and start again, you're not starting over, you're starting now. Because the idea of starting over conveys and connotes failure. And the way you refer to your circumstance affects your imagination and your emotions and your energy. So you're not starting over, you're starting now. If you digress, that's okay. Start again, start now. But the way you limit your digressions and the extent of your digression is you have a benchmark. You have an accountability document, an accountability discipline that allows you to identify when you have ceased doing those fundamental steps that you've identified that are crucial for your excellence in your field of practice. I want to encourage you today. Don't digress. Don't quit. Quake, but don't quit. Quiver, but don't quit. Question, but don't quit. Because if you don't quit, you can win eventually. This has been the Voice of Greatness broadcast. My name is Joel Bryant. Until next time, have a greatness week. Because you can.